When the group began in March of 2011, no one wanted to hear about it. No one was prepared to accept the fact that the Egyptian military that supposedly protected the Egyptian revolution, uh, no one was prepared to hear the fact that they were victimizing the Egyptian population. No one was prepared to believe that there is a new wave of oppression coming about at the hands of the military that had been glorified so much by the Egyptian media from day one, in almost a Nazi Germany propaganda type of way. So at first, we were shut down, or not shut down, but we were rejected. People did not want to even listen. And people didn't know how severe the problem was. We didn't even know how severe the problem was. It was actually when we started getting, when we started indulging ourselves in these issues, when we realized that this isn't just a couple of hundred people we're talking about, that there are thousands of people who have fallen victim to this exceptional form of justice, to this exceptional judiciary.
And you started taking testimonies from people, I think, right?
And this is how the group began. The group began serving three different purposes. Firstly, collecting testimonies from the families of the victims of military trials, as well as the victims themselves, those who got suspended sentences and got out, or those who, very few people had actually gotten innocent verdicts for, or those who served a bit of time and then got out. So collecting testimonies, which in turn we'd use to raise awareness on the crisis of military trials. Secondly, the group would facilitate with human rights lawyers, who are, many of them are actually part of the group as well, would facilitate legal assistance for the families of underprivileged victims of military trials. So there was we were bridging the underprivileged families with these lawyers. And number three, it was bridging these families with the media, because sadly in Egypt still a very, very classist society where the elites are the ones that still have access to the power and to the media, while the underprivileged segments of society are completely ignored. And this is where the group was trying to bridge these underprivileged families with the media in order to get their voice out. So it was an awareness, that we were raising awareness, we were collecting testimonies, and we were trying to provide the families with legal assistance. It's not us that were providing them, it was the heroes that are the human rights lawyers that have been working in this field, not just for 18 months, but for the last 3 to 4, for years.
And so has it had some sort of discernible impact?
So when the group began, as we said earlier, we were faced with rejection. People were in complete denial. People were not prepared at all to believe, and every time we'd bring it up, people would ask us to just refrain from discussing this issue at the moment. But as time progressed, and as we had raised more awareness on the issue, and as more and more people were being subjected to these military trials, it was becoming more apparent for the public that, okay, it's not just thugs being sentenced in these military courts, that everyone can fall victim to the injustice that comes as a result of these trials. Most notably in the May 15th demonstrations that were happening in front of the Israeli embassy, where a huge number of young people, many of them, most of them university students, as well as just people who you could not in any way accuse of being thugs, they were rounded up and they were sentenced in. They got suspended sentences, thankfully, but they were put on trial in front of these military courts. And this is when the media started to take notice. This is when more people started to realize, oh, okay, clearly these aren't just thugs. Clearly, this is being used to oppress Egyptians, the tool of military trials. So as time progressed, people were becoming more and more aware of the crisis of military trials. People were becoming angrier, or they were becoming more and more angered by the thought of returning to oppression. So thankfully, we went from complete rejection to the demand of saying no to military trials, being one of the first and main demands amongst most political and human rights groups in Egypt today. Whether or not this is a public demand, that would be pushing it if I said that this was a public demand. However, I can safely say that 15 months ago, if you went down into the streets and you were talking to people about the issue of military trials, they'd say, of course, it's the thugs and we need this, we don't have security, we need this for security. And 15 months later, you go down and you talk to them, you realize that after 15 months they don't have security, and yet the military trials are still happening. Therefore, clearly there is no correlation between their level of security and these unjust trials.
And you've also, I think as part of your work, am I right, that you documented people's testimonies on video?
Yes.
And posted those online and distributed information that way as well?
One of the most noticeable outlets for the No Military Trials for Civilians group is the YouTube channel, which is Tahrir Diaries. This channel contains lots of documented video testimonies by the families as well as by the victims, and this was very effective, because when you read a testimony is very different from when you see it and when you hear it. And when you read the testimony, there's only so much that you can feel, but these videos were contagious, and these videos were heart-wrenching, and they were spreading. I'm not going to say they were spreading virally, but they were spreading to the people that it needed to get, that they needed to reach. So journalists were constantly accessing these videos, and then they were asking us for, so and so's parents to come and speak on a certain television channel or so on. So the video documentation was one of the most prominent aspects of the campaign.
And did that, when you talk about journalists, are you talking about Egyptian journalists as well as international journalists? Is it something that's been discussed on Egyptian television?
Both Egyptian journalists and foreign journalists took interest in the cause of military trials. And at the beginning, it was more foreign journalists that were brave enough to discuss this. But as time progressed, you had more... But also from the very beginning, there were lots of very brave Egyptian journalists who were trying to get the message out and across.
And am I right, some of those testimonies, I mean, it's not just that people were arrested and deprived of the liberty of being out. They were badly treated in custody.
The issue of military trials is not just the fact that they were being taken and they were facing military trials, but it's in the process itself of how they get arrested and how they're detained before they go to the court, and then what happens to them during their trial, and then where they're detained after the trial. And there are numerous cases of torture. It's almost like whenever you hear about someone being detained by the army, instantly you think about torture and abuse and a huge amount of violence being exercised on these people.
Including sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse with regards to men, I do not recall if there is any sexual abuse with regards to men who have fallen victims to military trials. At least the ones that I have at least the males that I have encountered. However, one of the most prominent examples of abuse were the virginity checks that were practiced systematically on female prisoners or female victims of military trials. These virginity checks were carried out in order to prevent anyone from accusing the military of raping these girls. So it's this putrid patriarchal mentality of uh, of demeaning women, and these virginity checks, they claim that they do this in order to to protect the women, but in fact they do this to break the girls. So this is one form of sexual abuse that takes place. However, most notably, it's physical abuse. Obviously, there's lots of moral abuse involved.